All right, so it looks like it's 6 o'clock. Welcome everybody who's tuning in from around New Mexico to this virtual forum of the candidates running for the New Mexico Court of Appeals and the New Mexico State Supreme Court. We don't have everybody, but we do have a lot of the candidates, and tonight's a great opportunity for you to hear directly from them. I'd like to just go around and have everybody introducing themselves, starting with the candidates for the Court of Appeals Position 1 and the incumbent Judge Zachary Ives.
Hi, thank you, Chris. My name is Zach Ives, and I just want to say at the outset, thank you to the State Bar and especially the Appellate Practice Section for setting up this event. I think it's really a helpful forum to let folks know more about us as candidates. Just briefly about me, I'm a fifth-generation New Mexican, born and raised here, born in Las Cruces and primarily raised in the Albuquerque area. I went away for college, came back to New Mexico for law school, went to UNM and graduated from UNM. And after that was fortunate to have an opportunity to clerk for our state Supreme Court for then Chief Justice Pam Minzner, which was a wonderful experience and one that I draw on every day in my own work. After my clerkship, I went into a litigation practice that I had for 17 years, and it was a very diverse litigation practice. I did criminal work, civil work, I did appellate work and trial work. I did work in the state courts and in the federal courts. And within the civil work that I did, there was a pretty wide variety there too. So I was a bit of a generalist, and I think that served me well in the time that I've been on the court. And I've been on the court since January of 2019, was an early appointee of Governor Lujan Grisham, having gone through the bipartisan judicial nominating commission process, the interview and the written application, and was fortunate enough to have my name sent up to the governor, and was deeply humbled and honored to get a chance to do the important work of the Court of Appeals. And it's been a real privilege to do that difficult work over the last coming on 2 years now. So that's a little bit about me. I look forward to answering questions, and thanks again for including me.
Judge Ives, thank you. Let's talk to and get to know your Republican challenger, Barbara Johnson.
Thank you, sir. Esteemed justices and judges and all of the members of the State Bar, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you and answer some questions. A very little bit about me is I'm not from New Mexico. I'm from Louisiana, but I try very hard to control that accent. If I say something that someone doesn't understand, just let me know. I've only had one judge stop me in the middle of a trial, and I'll explain to you later what the word youngins means if you don't know what that means. He did not. I'm from Louisiana, but I chose New Mexico. My husband and I chose New Mexico to raise our children here. We moved here when they were 15 and 3 months old, because when we'd visited, we were so impressed. Even though it was very brown as compared to green Louisiana, lots of dirt instead of trees. We were so impressed with the three cultures, celebrating each other, and we wanted very much for our children to have that opportunity. So we moved here from Louisiana. I too graduated from UNM Law School. It took me a while to get there because I was raising youngins and working full time. But I have practiced family law since 1988. Family law is a very broad practice, crossed swords with, I think, just about every family law attorney in New Mexico that's over the age of 25. And I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move over to the Court of Appeals Position 2, and we'll start with Judge Shamara Henderson. She's a Democrat and the incumbent here.
Good evening, and thank you so much for hosting this event. I'm very honored to be here with all of you this evening. My name is Shamara Henderson. and I am born and raised here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I too left for college. I went to American University in Washington, D.C., where I had so many amazing opportunities. But I knew that I wanted to come back and be a lawyer and hopefully one day a judge in New Mexico. So I came back and went to UNM School of Law. After graduation, I had an amazing opportunity to clerk for one of the adjunct professors I had at the time, who was just appointed to the New Mexico Supreme Court. It was Justice Charlie Daniels. And I often lean into many of the lessons that he taught me as a lawyer and now as a judge as well. After that, I was a state prosecutor, and then I was associate counsel in the governor's office, where I primarily worked on criminal legal issues, criminal policy, environmental law issues. And then I left and joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I was a federal prosecutor for several years, mainly my focus being on large, complex cases, such as international child pornography cases, and higher level drug trafficking organization cases involving wiretaps and that kind of thing. Towards the end, I knew I wanted to start getting some more civil experience, and so I joined the civil division at the U.S. Attorney's Office for my last year there. And then I started my own law firm with another assistant United States attorney, where we focused on criminal defense, civil rights, and plaintiffs' work. My firm, after a year, merged with Friedman Boyd, where I continued to do that same work on behalf of that firm. And in 2019, there was a lot of changes in my personal and professional life, two of which Justice Daniels passed away at the same time. One of my mentors, Raymond Hamilton, passed away, the first Black civil chief at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I kind of came to a place where I started thinking, what do I want my legacy to be? I've always wanted to be a judge, so I need to start seriously thinking about how I want to accomplish that. And the opportunity came up. I applied. I made it through the bipartisan Judicial Nominating Commission and was honored to be appointed by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham in February. I, of course, had to shut down my law practice, so I started on the court in March, and I've been in that position since then. Thank you.
Judge Henderson, thank you so much. We'll move to the New Mexico Court of Appeals position. I'm sorry, before we go there, we're going to go back to position 2, and we have the Libertarian, Stephen Curtis. Just a friendly reminder to try to keep those responses to about 2 minutes or less.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this panel, and I hope that we've got some people watching. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My parents moved to Nebraska when I was 3, so I grew up there and went to high school there. And I'm a big Cornhusker football fan, of course. And I went to undergraduate degree at Northwestern University, engineering degree, and then moved to University of Virginia for my law degree. And I moved out here in 1978. And I've been here ever since, practicing law, civil practice. I started with Poole, Tinnen, and Martin. Was there about 5 years, and then moved to Milton and Puccini, a couple of other smaller firms, and then I was with Franchini, Wagner, Oliver, Franchini, and Curtis for another 5 years. And then since 2001, I've been on my own. Mostly litigation, but I also do transactional work. But most of my time is spent in litigation, and this is my second run for office. I ran for Congress in 1984 as a Libertarian, and haven't really been active since then. Simply practicing law and trying to help the people that I represent. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Curtis, thank you. Let's move to the candidates for Court of Appeals, position 3, and we'll start with Judge.
You forgot me.
Oh, I did forget you. I'm sorry. We have the Republican Gertrude Lee. Thank you. I'm just so eager to get to position 3 for some reason. I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
No problem. Siya Gertrude Lee and siya tuwahan initially tuwasan ni basichin tachini dasite auto kiani dasinala. My name is Gertrude Lee, and I am from Kirtland, New Mexico. I was born and raised, born in Shiprock, New Mexico, raised here in Kirtland, New Mexico. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. I introduced myself to all in Navajo. Thank you for having me and for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about myself. I went to college in Nebraska as well, and I graduated from Creighton University, and I came back to New Mexico straight after to UNM School of Law. And I graduated with a certificate in Indian law. After that, I went to work as an attorney in Gallup, New Mexico as a prosecutor, and then later became the chief prosecutor of the Navajo Nation, where I managed 10 legal offices across the land base the size of West Virginia, and managed the legal staff in all of those offices, as well as the support staff. And in that position, I was basically head of the criminal cases, all coming from the Navajo Nation, in addition to the child abuse and neglect cases and extraditions and various other criminal and civil issues that pop up on the Navajo Nation. After I finished my appointment at Navajo Nation, I came back to the Farmington, San Juan County area, where my family is located, and started working as a prosecutor here in Farmington. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being patient with me on that. Now we can move to Court of Appeals Position 3, and we'll first talk to Democrat Judge Jane Yohalam. Oh, you were muted. So
I'm muted.
There we go.
Sorry. I'm Judge Jane Yohalam. I'd like to thank the appellate practice session for putting this together. It feels like a bit of a homecoming to me to be at an event that they're sponsoring. I am the newest judge on the Court of Appeals. I was appointed by Governor Lujan Grisham on June 20th after being vetted by the bipartisan commission. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in the days before women were lawyers. And so I thought I would be a teacher like my mother, went to college, but it was during the civil rights era. And I so admired the lawyers and judges that I saw stepping up and enforcing both our Constitution and the new civil rights laws that had been passed by our Congress, and doing it even under threats of violence. So I went to law school. I was lucky enough by the time I was graduating from college that law schools were taking women in bigger numbers. After law school, I worked for a public interest firm in Washington, D.C., representing children with disabilities who were at that point seeking to gain access to public education. Many of them were excluded altogether. There certainly were not the services that are now commonplace. I moved to New Mexico and used that knowledge about disability law as a hearing officer in New Mexico in special education cases for more than 26 years. But most of my practice in New Mexico over more than 30 years was as an appellate practice specialist, representing people from every part of the state in all kinds of cases. I've handled more than 400 appeals and have more than 100 published decisions where I've been counsel. And let me stop there. I'm probably out of my 2-minute time.
Thank you for letting us get to know you more, and we'll also talk to your Republican challenger, Thomas Montoya.
Here. Thank you. Good evening. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to address you. Thank you, the sponsors, KOB, also the appellate practice section and the state bar. I'm Tom Montoya. I was born and raised here in New Mexico. Well, my family goes back to 1582, and that was before the Mayflower in 1620. That's how long we've been here. And I love New Mexico, but I did go to school in California. I attended Stanford University first, and then the University of Southern California, where I got my law degree. But I got wisdom and I came back to New Mexico where I belong. I've been practicing as a trial lawyer for 39 years with Atkinson and Kelsey Law Firm. During that time, I have done a whole lot to improve the law. I was the chair of the committee of the Civil Procedure Committee. I was a member of that committee for 7 years, and while there, we promulgated the rules of procedure for domestic relations, domestic violence cases. And I was the co-chair of the Child Support Guidelines Commission that has promulgated our child support laws. I have been a member of the American Law Institute for 21 years. During that tenure, of course, the Institute promulgates all the restatements. During my tenure, we've done property, torts. These are the third restatement now. Property, torts, trusts, agency, wills, donative transfers, restitution, and just enrichment and employment law liability insurance. I have been also qualified by the Judicial Selection Committee to be district court judge 3 times. That's my time. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's move over to the New Mexico Supreme Court candidates, starting with position 1, and we'll start with Justice Shannon Bacon.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Ramirez, for being here this evening and moderating this event. It will be, I'm guessing, a little bit better than when I was the moderator 2 years ago for the Court of Appeals. And thank you so much to the appellate practice section for continuing to put these events on to help educate our community about what it is we do and what makes us tick. My name is Shannon Bacon, and I was appointed to the New Mexico Supreme Court in January of 2019. And that was after being recommended by the Bipartisan Judicial Nominating Commission and going through a rigorous vetting in the governor's office. Prior to my appointment to the Supreme Court, I was a district court judge in Albuquerque for almost a decade. While I was at the district court, I was the presiding civil judge over the civil division, and I handled thousands of cases spanning from complex commercial litigation, adult guardianship, real estate, contract disputes, election issues, domestic cases, children's court, and an awful lot of appeals from Metro Court. I was also the Bernalillo County water judge and handled all water litigation that was brought before the court for Bernalillo County. Prior to becoming a judge, I was a lawyer in private practice where I focused on litigation and appellate work. And I was a former board member of the appellate practice section. So much like Judge Yohalam, it feels like a bit of a homecoming to be back with folks that you worked with to improve appellate skills and the appellate practice in the state of New Mexico. Like many of my colleagues, I began my legal career as a law clerk, clerking for Judge Joseph Alarid at the Court of Appeals. And I too, like Judge Ives, take the lessons I learned all those many years ago and put them into practice every day in my job at the New Mexico Supreme Court. So thank you everyone for being here. I look forward to hearing the section members' questions of all of the candidates tonight.
Excellent, thank you. And let's get to know your Republican opponent, Ned Fuller.
Good evening. Yes, my name is Ned Fuller. I'm been in New Mexico for 27 years, practicing law and raising my family. I currently serve as a deputy district attorney in San Juan County. Prior to that, I was the acting cabinet secretary for the General Services Department. In that role and as a litigation bureau chief, I oversaw the litigation, much of the litigation involving the state. Prior to that, I oversaw the Workers' Compensation Administration and their court system. And prior to that, I was in private practice doing a wide variety of civil litigation. I've served as a district court judge. I've served as an administrative law judge. I had some wonderful experiences. Married, I have 4 daughters, all grown, 2 granddaughters and a grandson. And appreciate you all giving us the opportunity to share some of our thoughts and look forward to the questions as we proceed.
All right, thank you. And let's move over to Supreme Court position 2, and we'll get to know Justice David Thompson a little better.
Thank you, Chris, and thank the Appellate Division of the Bar. Welcome. Hello, colleagues. Hello, candidates. Chris, I'm wondering which meeting you missed that you had to sit through a conversation with 11 judges and justices, but thank you for doing this. My name is David Thompson. I'm a justice on the New Mexico Supreme Court. I was honored to be appointed by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham with Justice Bacon after going through a bipartisan nominating commission. I join you here from Santa Fe, New Mexico, the home of my headquarters and 4th grade remote learning center. I am born and raised in Santa Fe, as is my wife, Patty Romero. I went to school out of state and then went down to work for Senator Bingaman for a while, where I began my interest in public service. I went to law school. After law school, I was a law clerk for a federal judge in Albuquerque, Bruce Black, where I learned about and developed my interest in the judiciary and in the law. After that, I went to the Attorney General's office, where I litigated cases in state court and federal court. I argued appeals at the New Mexico Court of Appeals, the New Mexico Supreme Court, and the 10th Circuit. I was a district court judge in the First Judicial, which makes up Santa Fe, Rio Arriba, and Los Alamos. I handle mostly a civil docket of a little over 1,000 cases. I am an executive board member of the Judicial Division of the American Bar Association Appellate Law Conference. I'm pleased to answer questions today, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. We should also mention that there is a Republican candidate in the Supreme Court position 2 field, Carrie Morris. An invitation was offered and that invitation wasn't taken. So we just wanted to address why you're not seeing Carrie Morris today. After everybody introduced themselves, it dawned on me that I never introduced myself. So just really quickly, my name is Chris Ramirez, and I'm an investigative and political reporter for KOB-4. And I have been in some of your courtrooms before, especially Justice Bacon being a lot of criminal work in Albuquerque. So it's good to see all of you in this setting, and best of luck to you all. The first questions are designed to just get to know you a little bit better, and I'm going to flip them. So we'll ask the Court of Appeal candidates one question, and then we'll switch it up to the Supreme Court candidates. And just so you know, candidates, it took about 20 minutes to get through just introductions. And so I'm assuming it'll take about 20 minutes to get through just one question. So just a friendly reminder to keep those responses to about 2 minutes or less. Let's start our first question with Judge Ives. We wanted to know, who is somebody, and it can be more than one person, who has really inspired or influenced your work as a lawyer, or even perhaps now as a judge, and maybe you can explain to us why that person or people were so influential for you.
Thank you for the question. I will name 2 people. I could name others, but I would say the main 2 people are my former boss, Chief Justice Minsner, and Justice Thurgood Marshall of the Supreme Court, and also former civil rights lawyer Thurgood Marshall. And I guess probably I would say, in terms of my work as a judge, I'm influenced by both of those people. Obviously, no firsthand experience with Justice Marshall, a lot with Justice Minsner, but I would say I really learned, the craft of judging primarily from those 2, from Justice Marshall, from reading his opinions and learning about his life and his approach to judging, and firsthand through my experience working with, Justice Minsner. And I'll just also add that Justice Marshall's career as a litigator is definitely an inspiration to me. I became very, very interested in the civil rights movement, and I would say borderline obsessed with Justice Marshall's participation in that when I was younger, and that has stuck with me all these years and through the current day. So those would be my 2. Thank you.
Thank you for your responses. And let's go to Barbara Johnson. Who has been influential for your career?
I think I found my mute button and unmute button. I think I can't even tell you the name of the judge or the lawyers that were most influential in me becoming a lawyer and wanting to be a judge, because this is how it happened. Both of my parents worked all my life, and one day my poor father got stuck with me when he had to go to work. And so I went to work with him. He was a maintenance man in a federal building in Louisiana. And he got to work, and he had to work in the boiler room, which was in the basement. And he said, "This is not safe for you. You're going to have to be someplace else." He said, "I'm going to sit you in a courtroom. Don't talk. Don't run in and out. Don't wiggle. Just listen, and I'll come back and get you as soon as I can." And I did. I was growing up, I was 12 years old. It was in the 50s and 60s in the South. It was a very racially tense time and a very gender biased time. I sat in the back of that courtroom until my dad came back about 8 hours later, and I watched a trial. I was so impressed that the litigants and the lawyers and everybody got all dressed up and came to this beautiful building. They clearly had a dispute, and they put it in front of the judge, and they listened to the judge, and they followed all the rules. And when it was over, they shook hands and they walked out of the courtroom. No one's house was burned down. No one got beat up. I'd never seen a resolution to what seemed like a very big problem to me that way. And when my dad picked me up, I said, "That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a lawyer and a judge." I give up on nursing and piano teaching. That's what I've been working to do since I was 12 years old. And those were the people that most influenced me.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. Let's ask the same question to Judge Shamara Henderson.
Thank you so much. I will be brief. There are three people. The first and foremost, which I previously mentioned, is Raymond Hamilton. I met him my first year of law school. He was a founder of the New Mexico Black Lawyers Association, the first Black civil chief at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And he is one of the many people whose shoulders I stand upon, being the first appellate judge, Black appellate judge in the state of New Mexico. And he taught me really, truly what that means to be a first, to be thoughtful to that, but as a lawyer to always ensure that you are coming from a place of competence and fighting for what is right, and being very broad and open with that responsibility. The next would be Justice Charlie Daniels. Again, in everything that I've done in my career, it's always been highly influenced by what he taught me, which is to know the law better than anybody else in the courtroom, to always be fair, and to really just put 100% of every effort that you can into that work. And also to have an amazing life outside of the courtroom as well, and ensure that you have that balance. And of course, like Judge Ives, I have to mention Justice Thurgood Marshall. Growing up, his career as a lawyer and certainly as a justice was always inspiring, and one of the many reasons that I wanted to become a lawyer and a judge one day myself.
Thank you so much. Let's ask Gertrude Lee the same question.
For me, it comes down to two big life events and the people tied to them. One of them was what sparked the interest in the law for me as a young person. When I was graduating from high school, that same year, my brother was graduating from law school at UNM. And I remember him taking us into the American Indian Law Center, where I had both of my brothers went through the Indian law program there. And one of my brothers ended up becoming an engineer instead of a lawyer, but their pictures are hanging down there. And I remember thinking, I want my picture on that wall. I want to be a part of the the tradition of Indian law and making an impact in the community. So my brother kind of set the bar high in terms of that, to achieve that educationally. And my interests continued when I was in law school. I had the opportunity to clerk for the Navajo Nation Supreme Court. And a couple of the justices at the time took an interest in the work I was doing. And, you know, there's not many Native American justices or judges in the state court system that you can really clerk for, but I was really happy and grateful to clerk at the Navajo Nation Supreme Courts. And at that time, Justice Herb Yazzie was the Chief Justice for the Supreme Court. And I learned a lot from that experience about what's expected of a judge and the work that they do. So I'd say those two big life events and experiences and people had a great impact on how I ended up in the law and continuing along this trajectory.
Great, thank you for that answer. And let's go to Stephen Curtis now.
Thank you. I would say there's an event and then some people. The event that really got me going to law school is when I was in college at Northwestern in 1970, when Kent State happened. And that convinced me that I should go to law school and become a lawyer and save the world. Well, that was kind of a large undertaking, which hasn't quite been accomplished, but I did follow through with going to law school and becoming a lawyer. The other defining event, I think, or not event, but the people. When I practiced law in the firm of Franchini, Wagner, Oliver, Franchini, and Curtis, we got along great. We had a lot of fun practicing law. And especially Justice Franchini, I think I saw from him that you need to connect with people. You need to really feel for your clients, and I think he did that. I saw that in him, and all of us got along well, and we did. We had fun, and we represented our clients and felt for their everyday kinds of needs. And that's kind of informed the focus of how I practice law.
I appreciate that. Let's go to Judge Jane Yohalam.
Okay, there are a couple people. It's given the events of the last few weeks, it's hard not to name Justice Ginsburg as one of those people. She began to teach at Columbia Law School when I was a third-year student there, and her method of practicing civil rights law and strategy was something important to me in my early career, something we were following in terms of rights for people with disabilities as well. But I think what I really see in her now as a judge is her hard work, her persistence, her scholarship, and the fact that she not only was an advocate for women's rights, but she took that and was an advocate for equal rights for all people, that she understood that being pigeonholed affected men as well as women. And so as a judge, I really admire that ability just to not just advocate for one group of people, but to see it from all perspectives. Closer to home, I would say Justice Chavez and Justice Bassan have been guiding lights for me. I think that they represented the kind of scholarship, compassion, and understanding for New Mexico and for our body of law that I would like to emulate as a judge.
Thank you for that. Let's go to Thomas Montoya.
Thank you, Chris. A lovely question. As to going into law, that would be my father. His name was Tomas Montoya. And my father, because when we were growing up, it came from a family of 8. 6 children, it was mandatory that we all have dinner together. And when we did, there he was with all the issues of the day, and you had to be prepared to know about it, to research it, to take a position one way or the other and defend it. And if you weren't ready, you were ridiculed, and you didn't want to be ridiculed by my father. Since then, beginning in 1981, it was my partner, David Kelsey, who was just a tremendous trial lawyer. And he taught me so much about trial practice and the use of it in court, evidence, rules of procedure. And he taught me a real love of the courtroom itself, the back and forth, the repartee, the winning, the losing. That was tremendous. I also have a whole lot more to thank Justice Joe Baca. He is the one that nominated me for the American Law Institute, which is just a tremendous organization. I learned so much from it. Also, Justice Pam Minsner, who appointed me to chair the Rules Committee for the Domestic Relations Rules. She said that the district courts are running amok. They needed rules. I'm a rules person. It's yours. Do it. And I admire her so much and her writing. More recently, interestingly, is Justice Amy Coney Barrett. I listened to her, the way she presented herself and defended the Constitution. I was so impressed, not only with her intellect, but with the way she handled herself, her composure, her grace, her charm when under attack. It was really, really compelling and amazing. And so that's a new model to aspire to. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, for the Supreme Court candidates, we're going to switch your question up. We want to know, in your view, what character traits are essential to being an effective justice on the New Mexico Supreme Court? And we'll start with Justice Shannon Bacon.
Thank you, Chris. I think the Supreme Court, the role of the Supreme Court is different than that of a Court of Appeals judge, in that the Supreme Court not only does the deep dive on the law and is the last word on the law, but there's also a lot of administrative responsibility. So I think it's being able to blend two different skill sets. One is a really deep understanding of how the case is created below, what goes into making the record, the efforts of the lawyers, the judges, the parties, and what all of those moving parts are that constitute the case that comes before the Supreme Court, and really having a love and an affinity for research and writing. And then the other part of it is the administrative side. We manage the judiciary, all 13 judicial districts, about 8,000 employees. And we also set policy for the judiciary as a whole, and we have oversight over the bar. So having a really deep understanding of how the judiciary works is something that lends itself, along with that deep dive and keen understanding of the law and the limitations of the law. So I think it's both of those skill sets.
Excellent. Same question for Ned Fuller.
Thank you. I think in terms of characteristics, in light of what Justice Bacon has said, I think one of the characteristics that's important is humility. A Supreme Court justice, any judge really, you are analyzing and applying the law, you're making a decision, and it may not be a decision that you agree with, honestly, because of what the law dictates. And so you have to have a measure of humility, I think, to understand that you understand your role and sort of stay in that role. And not exceed it. I think I agree with Justice Bacon that there's an administrative function, an oversight function. I saw that when I was the director of the Workers' Compensation Administration and oversaw their court system. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in terms of administering the justice system so that the judges and all the staff really can do their jobs and do their jobs effectively. So having those administrative skills is an important characteristic as well. Obviously, being willing to work hard. You're in an elected position. You have to. You're a servant, a public servant, and so you have to have an inner drive to accomplish a task before you. You also sort of the intellectual rigor of the job. You need a certain level of understanding and ability to focus and study. And so I think those are some of the important characteristics for a Supreme Court justice.
Thank you for that. Let's move over to Justice David Thompson.
Thank you, Chris. I would list experience, curiosity of the law, intellectual curiosity of the law, and proven diligence and hard work. The New Mexico Supreme Court is the court of last resort for a reason. We get the difficult questions. They are the unanswered questions. And you have to have a real curiosity, intellectual curiosity about the law in order to address the broad range of issues we address. In addition, you need to commit yourself to the proper performance of the judicial system. And as an example, Justice Bacon and I have worked hard to ensure that our judicial system remains open during the time of COVID. And that's not a matter of delegation, that's a matter of direct action. And it's, in my view, helpful to have the experience in the judiciary and the experience in the trial court in order to make sure that that happens. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move over to some more nuanced questions. And these questions will just be for the candidates in a single position. So I'll ask a question. This first question, in the Court of Appeals position 1 candidates will answer this, and then there'll be different questions as we move on. So we'll start with this question for the position 1 Court of Appeals candidates. Given that an elected judge must face periodic retention elections, how do you approach cases where the correct decision may be unpopular with a substantial segment of the public? And Barbara Johnson, we're going to go to you first for this question. You're still muted, yeah.
Well, I clicked unmute. Did that one work?
It worked, yes.
Thank you, sir. I think the most important thing is to follow the law as it is written. I really liked when I learned what a strict constructionist was. I think along with following the law as written for a judge, one must, in an appellate position, be able to explain well in writing, recognizing it may not be a popular view with all of those reading it, having to follow it, but be able to explain the decision, the analysis in a way so that everyone involved in the direct litigation realizes they've been heard. Their side has been heard. Their story, they got to tell their story. But there are rules and there are laws that must be followed. And it is not a judge's job to rewrite that law. It is a judge's job to analyze the facts in front of them and to issue the decision according to that law.
Let's ask Judge Ives the same question. How do you approach a decision when you know the correct decision will be largely unpopular with the public?
Well, as judges, we can never allow public opinion on a particular case to drive our decision making. We have to follow the law and the facts, regardless of how unpopular the outcome may be, and regardless of its consequences for our own ability to continue working as judges. That's sort of one of the fundamental duties, as I see it, of the judge. And I do agree with Ms. Johnson that explanation plays an important role in this. In explaining to the parties and explaining to the public the reasons for the decision is also a bedrock principle of our system. We need to have transparency for many, many reasons, and one of them is, as judges, we're not advocates for clients anymore, but we are advocates for the rule of law. And part of that is to give reasoned decisions, explain the legal authorities that we're relying on so that members of the public can see that what we're doing is applying the law and not simply arbitrarily choosing a side based on our personal preference or partisanship or something improper, some other improper consideration.
Thank you for that. Let's move over to the candidates for Court of Appeals position 2. The question is, how well do you think New Mexico does in providing people with fair and equal access to legal assistance and the legal system? And what changes do you think should be made in that regard? We'll start with Stephen Curtis.
That's kind of an interesting question. I do think that there are programs in place that provide or allow the system to provide legal services to people who, for instance, may not be able to afford attorneys. I think that's important. I think it's important for all of us to provide legal services to people who can't afford it. I do in my practice. I know that I get calls. Oh gosh, I get a call probably twice a week from somebody who simply has a question that they need answered, and I'll talk with them for 10, maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes, and I never see them again. I never charge them for it. I think everyone should be doing that as a matter of providing service to people who simply need it. And sometimes I'm not saying that you should take humongous cases all the time. It simply can't be done. And I think we've got systems in place to provide that to people who can't afford it. But I'm not sure that there's not that much that we can do to do better than we can. You can always say you can put more money into the programs. But I think generally New Mexico is doing a fairly decent job of providing services to people who need it, even if they can't afford it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move over to Gertrude Lee.
Thank you. I think that New Mexico is doing a good job at tackling that question. One of the new movements in the bar is the establishment of the Commission on Equity and Justice. And I think that once that commission gets going and they start making findings and start digging into the question a little bit more, it seems like part and parcel of that is access to the courts. For those of us who are trial attorneys, like Ned and I right now, and Barbara and Tom, the COVID crisis has kind of highlighted some of the issues with that. When you see that litigants and witnesses and victims aren't able to get into court hearings because they don't have access to the internet or they don't have reliable phone reception. A few days ago we had a pretty bad windstorm out here, and my internet gets knocked out when the wind gets going for whatever reason. And so it seems to have highlighted some of the, there's a limited amount of what the courts can do in terms of providing that infrastructure, but highlighting why it's so important that we have access to these basic utilities for everybody. I mean, it's highlighted at this point. And I look forward to what the findings of the commission will be and how we can improve access to the courts. You know, recently, a number of the candidates here, we were on a forum with the Hispanic Bar Association, and there's different groups and other subgroups, bar associations that are working on making the legal community more diverse and more inclusive to people, and creating programs that bring them in. You know, and just yesterday I was helping out my mom, you know, trying to find legal services for elderly folks, and they've got questions, you know, about elder law issues. And there's resources available that the New Mexico Bar has that I don't think a lot of people are aware of them. So I think we're doing a good job, and I think that with the commission and with what we learn after we process, after going through this public health crisis, that we're going to have some good next steps that we can take to improve access to the courts.
Great, thank you. And Judge Henderson, you can answer that question now.
Thank you. I think I'd like to start off with one of the things that seems obvious to me, which is equal access to justice. Justice Bacon recently did an op-ed about how important that program is within New Mexico, especially with what's happening with COVID, right? Historically, we know when there's a downturn that people are going to need more access to the courts, and they're going to need representation for that, whether it's foreclosure cases, increases in domestic violence cases, anything that's going to come up when there's a downturn economically within the state. And equal access to justice is amazing in that it grants people who otherwise couldn't afford a lawyer the opportunity to have a lawyer on their behalf. And one of the positions that a judge can take is to encourage lawyers of New Mexico State Bar to participate in equal access. And so that is first and foremost. On the criminal side, I think another important position for judges to take is resources, right? And the concern over the lack thereof of resources. There are several counties in New Mexico that there aren't public defenders. You have private lawyers who are doing contract work that are making, you know, minimum wage basically in the attempt to represent people. And it's usually at a loss when you're representing under some of those PD contracts, and it's just due to a lack of resources. And so ensuring that we can have lawyers throughout the state who are being given money in an adequate manner, not even necessarily for personal reasons, right, for their personal income, but to be able to hire experts, to be able to travel, to be able to investigate the cases the way that they need to. I think it's really, really important to ensure that we are pushing resources towards those efforts to ensure that whether it's on the civil side or on the criminal side, everyone has access to competent lawyers and the means necessary to carry out the cases properly.
Thank you. Let's move over to the candidates for Court of Appeals Position 3. And here's your question. What measures are in place to keep the judiciary independent from political influence, and what changes, if any, would you like to be made in that regard? And we'll start with Tom Montoya.
Thank you, Chris. Well, the best measures for the judiciary are right in the Code of Judicial Conduct. A judge cannot be influenced by politics, by family, by passion, by any political influence in making a decision. I think that essentially would cover it. Kind of going to a question that was asked before, but I think it relates to this one, is that just because there might be a lot of political passion behind a certain issue is no reason for a judge not to rule. And we have signed up for that. We know that we came to the bench. We got now in our constitutional system the retention system. So you may not be retained, okay? But But that's what we sign on for. We know that. Okay, we still can't. Just because you lose your job, well, you're a good lawyer. You can do something else. Just because you may lose your position because of a retention when the public, for whatever reason, is impassioned and doesn't like that author or someone signing in, is no reason to violate the oath. We all take the oath. I certainly will do so and respect it 100%.
Thank you for that. Let's move over. Same question for Judge Uhallam.
I agree that the primary protection is the ethics of the judges themselves. One thing, though, that has struck me as almost an unintended consequence is how well New Mexico's system of electing judges to start with and then using retention and not having a partisan election after that has seemed to work to protect New Mexico's judiciary from partisan politics. I think there's a fair amount of contrast at the moment between how well New Mexico's done with that and the federal system, where there seem to be questions at least being raised about how much politics is playing a role in some federal court appointments. For me, it was counterintuitive because, you know, elections are always seen as the partisan way of doing things and as contributing to partisanship, but I think it really hasn't worked out that way. And so I appreciate New Mexico's system at the moment of having a mixture of partisan and nonpartisan elections and proceedings in order to retain judges.
Thank you for that. Let's move over to the candidates for Supreme Court position 1. Here's your question. The Supreme Court's decisions establish legal precedents that must be followed by lower courts and in subsequent cases, unless the Supreme Court overrules or modifies the precedent in a subsequent decision. How do you or would you approach the task of following or departing from existing precedents, and what factors would you take into consideration if you had to decide whether to overrule one of the court's previous decisions? We're going to start that with Ned Fuller. You're still muted, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. So we're talking about stare decisis. The idea one of the principles behind the rule of law is that the law is stable, it's predictable. And so we have to be very careful when it comes to overruling or casting aside, reversing prior positions. There is a standard in the courts and in the law for when that might be appropriate. And it has to do with changes that might occur either within the legal principle itself or within the sort of the environment that surrounds that principle. Has it become, essentially has it atrophied? Is it no longer a principle that is really supported as it might have been in the past? And so those are we would look at that law that tells us when it's appropriate to reverse a decision. And we have to, as I said, I think you have to be very conservative in that approach because the rule of law requires that the law be stable and that it be predictable, even to the point that sometimes when we get it wrong, we want to be careful depending on how long-standing the decision is and how much the community has grown to rely upon that principle. So I think that's the way I would approach that issue.
Excellent. Let's go to Justice Bacon.
I agree with the adage that it's done conservatively. It's something that the court approaches with great hesitancy. And I was frankly a little surprised when I joined the court with the frequency that lawyers ask us to overturn prior precedent. And it's not something to take lightly because people need that stability in the law. The executive and the legislature are the branches of government that are designed to react. to what's happening day to day in society. It's not the role of the courts to do that. So we are very cautious in overturning prior precedent, and it's really when that precedent has become unworkable, either through the course of time and evolution of legal thought that the principle doesn't work anymore, or it's the principle that has been declared is unworkable within the courts. It's creating conflict in the lower courts, not providing clear direction for how to handle a particular matter. Oftentimes, lawyers will ask us to overturn precedent, and while it may be something that we need to consider, it's also not the right case to engage in that particular analysis. So we both have to wait for the right time and the right case, and then be very trepidatious in making that decision.
All right, here is the question for the Supreme Court Position 2 candidates. By now, Americans are very familiar with the term legislating from the bench. How do you ensure that your rulings aren't that, a legislation from the bench? And we're going to start with David Thompson.
So how you ensure that you are not legislating from the bench is you understand your role in the democracy. We are the judicial branch. We are not the policymakers. The legislature drafts the laws and the executive executes. And you talked about, one of the questions was about, what are the foundations for the independent judiciary? One of the foundations of an independent judiciary is the people's trust that, in fact, we are going to decide matters based on objective facts and the law. And we are not going to create the law. And that is our fundamental obligation. Now, we have a part-time legislature. So oftentimes what I've discovered as a justice on the New Mexico Supreme Court is laws are written very broadly. And it requires a good deal of legislative intent to understand what the legislature's meant. But we are not there to legislate from the bench.
Excellent. Thank you for your answer. All right, we're going to go back for sort of our last round of questions, and I think we'll close it out after this, and then we'll let all of you make a final remark. Let's go back to the candidates for the Court of Appeals Position 1. In your opinion, what constitutes justice in relation to the work you do or would do as a judge on the court? And how do you view the work of the court in terms of its impact on individual people's lives and on society as a whole? And we'll start with Judge Ives.
Thank you. I'll do my best in 2 minutes with that very big and important question. I think for me, it kind of boils down to respect. It's a respect for the law, whether that's a statute or precedent from the U.S. Supreme Court or our state Supreme Court or one of our court's own precedents, to recognize that as a judge, we need to work within those rules and follow those rules, and that's how we achieve justice, that is by applying those rules equally to everyone. And the other parts of this, I think, are a little more in the function of the judge and the sort of nuts and bolts of doing the work. One is to respect the parties and the lawyers by listening carefully, reading carefully, being generous in how you interpret the lawyer's arguments on behalf of their clients, and in how you characterize, and careful in how you characterize those arguments and analyze them when you're deciding a case. And this goes to the second part of your question, recognizing that your decisions have tremendous consequences for people and a huge impact on people's lives. And so it can be easy to lose sight of that fact when you get bogged down in the legal nuances and all the technical matters that we deal with, which are very important. But you have to be able to do both at once, right? Do the technical side, the academic side, without letting it become an academic exercise, because it's not. It's a matter that affects people in their lives. And the other is, I think, one thing we haven't talked much about is today is district court judges, and I think appellate judges, it's really, really important to have respect for our district court judges, and that means affording them proper deference where our standard of review, the law that governs how we look at a case, tells us to be deferential to the district court. We need to make sure that we're doing that not only to the judge, but also to juries. And another aspect of that respect for the district court, I think, is to write clearly so that if we are reversing a case and sending it back, the judge who gets the case after we're done with it has a sense of clarity as to what should happen next, what is the law that applies and what they're supposed to do next, and for future cases and other judges, so that when we issue a precedential decision, they know how to apply it and to apply it equally to everyone.
Judge Ives, thanks. Let's move over to Barbara Johnson.
Thank you, sir. As a trial lawyer down here in the trenches for 32 years, representing wives, husbands, being a guardian ad litem, in divorce cases, paternity cases, domestic violence cases, just about every side of every kind of family law case, I think one of the best things I've ever learned with all of that experience is that all involved, from every litigant to every lawyer to every judge you appear in front of, there has to be an equal application of your attention, of your caring, of your listening skills. I have read a number of opinions where district court judges are just kind of raked over the coals, and they hurt my heart, because the district court judges have a very difficult job too, as I'm sure everybody recognizes. And the litigants that are going to read and live by this decision have to know that all that they went through up until that time was the best that every judge and every judicial officer could possibly do, or they will lose their respect for the equal branch of government that we represent. So applying that formula of equity to all involved, I think, is a real big package and is not easy. There are many opposing counsel that I wish would just disappear off the face of the earth, but they have clients too, and their clients are important too. And I think it's important for us as appellate judges to communicate that in our decisions.
Ms. Johnson, thank you. Let's move over to another question for the Court of Appeals position. 2 candidates. Your question is, do you anticipate that at some time you will be called upon as a judge to decide a case in which your personal feelings would point to one outcome, but a neutral application of the law would require the different result? Would you be able to sit as a judge on such a case? And if so, how would you go about resolving any internal conflict that the case may have created? Let's start with Shamara Henderson, Judge Shamara Henderson, to start that question off.
Thank you for that question. And I think that's something that probably all of us have thought about before we put our names in for the position in the first place, right? What can you do as a judge to ensure that you are being fair and equal and not allowing your personal biases to impact the outcome of your cases? And so with that, I think first and foremost is understanding where you lean on different policy issues, recognizing that internally and being thoughtful to that as you move forward as a judge. Instead of dismissing that, right, and not acknowledging that that could potentially influence the way that you move forward in a case. Then obviously vigorously understanding the law in the situation in which you're being asked to write an opinion in every case, but understanding that the statutes, the case law, the rules, what is the binding law in that case, and ensuring that you are doing a very competent and thorough job of applying that law to the facts before the court. I think even in times when you personally disagree with the outcome, that if you have fully vetted the case, have ensured that the law was applied correctly and fairly to all the parties and the people who represent those parties in that case, then at the end of the day that you have done your job. I think it's been mentioned by several candidates here today. The judicial branch is a branch of interpretation of the law. We are not the policymakers, we're not the executors of the law, but certainly to interpret that law correctly and fairly. And I think at the end of the day, if you do that, you've done your job well.
Thank you. Let's move over to Gertrude Lee.
I echo that. And I think on a personal level, when you think about the personal views, you know, as a prosecutor and as someone who's worked in public service for my entire legal career, you know, you get a variety of witnesses, you get a variety of victims of crimes. You know, one minute someone might be cussing you out and getting mad at you for prosecuting a criminal. One second, you know, you've got people who want you to go, you know, full bar on somebody and not hold anything back. And you have to have the ability to step back and put aside whatever you might think, you know, in that case, about a case or about a witness or about a victim or about a defendant, and think about what is at the core of what you are doing. And I learned very early in my legal career as a prosecutor that, you know, it's not, for me, what drives me in the work that I do is whether I'm doing justice or not. Treating people differently and letting my personal view affect how I handle a case, there's no room for that in the work that I do and the work that judges should do. And I don't think any of the judges, justices, or other legal professionals here do that. But for me, it became very clear, you know, when people started calling some of the cases, you know, winning cases or losing cases in a criminal context, you know, I don't see it that way. My question is whether justice was done, because in the work that I've done as a prosecutor, I can't say that winning or losing a big motion in a murder case is a win or a loss. It's whether justice was done, because either way, if you prevail, it's premised on a lot of times because something terrible happened to another human being and someone is being punished for it. So there's a lot that goes into that question. It's a really good question. I think the best way to answer it is to give you an idea of what drives me in the work that I do, and it's taking ego and personal view out of it to ensure that justice is done.
Thank you for your response. Let's move to Stephen Curtis.
Thank you. I think we all agree that there's no place in judging for your personal feelings, your personal preferences for policies. And I think that you simply have to look at what the Constitution and the statute says and apply the law. You have to start, I think, by understanding what your personal preference might be, so that you can be sure that that's not getting involved in the decision making. But I think fidelity to the law is the number one requirement for all judges, and you just simply have to keep that in mind when you're doing the judging.
Thank you for your response. Let's move over to the Court of Appeals Position 3 candidates, and here's your question. What role do the courts play in promoting ethnic and gender diversity in the legal profession, and what, if anything, would you do as a member of the court to promote ethnic and gender diversity? And we'll start with Judge O'Hallam.
Okay, so this is in the legal profession. I mean, one of the starting points, I think, is that I certainly see clerkships as not just hiring people who are going to, help me, but also as training young lawyers. And I think that it is appropriate to make sure that that the clerks that we hire are representative of all segments of the community. I also see as an important role of appellate judges teaching. And, it's something I've done as an appellate practice specialist, and it's something I plan to continue to do. And I think that that can be used to reach out to different communities and to inform them about the possibility of becoming a lawyer, and not just, I think UNM Law School is a fabulous resource, is doing a very good job of that, and participating in their programs and their outreach programs, is something I plan to do as a judge.
Wonderful. Thank you for your response. Let's go to Thomas Montoya.
Thank you, Chris. Excuse me. Start this. Once again, the Code of Judicial Conduct governs at least how adjudication is done, and then I'll address maybe the broader question as well. But I have it here, and it's for a purpose. A judge shall not, in the performance of judicial duties by words or conduct, manifest bias or prejudice, or engage in harassment, including but not limited to bias, prejudice, or harassment based upon race, religion, color, national origin, ethnicity, ancestry, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, spousal affiliation, socioeconomic status, political affiliation, age, physical or mental handicap, or serious medical condition, and shall not permit court staff, court officials, or others subject to the judge's direction to or control to do so. So that's an oath. That's what we all take. That is what I will do. With respect to issues of discrimination and inclusion, yeah, a judge has to be a role model. So in addition to the duties that I just stated, there's going to be seminars, there's going to be forums like this one, and these principles just have to be enunciated over and over again so that people will emulate them. One thing that can be done is to just ask people to be a judge, and to be a judge and in a circumstance, in whatever comes in the situation you find yourself in, rise above yourself, be a judge, handle this situation as if you were without discrimination. That's what I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Let's move over to the Supreme Court Position 1 candidates. Here's your next question. Given that the Supreme Court can, and in many cases does, decide that an appeal to the court will not get full review, and that the lower court decision will stand without further action by the court, how should the court make that determination in particular cases? And are there certain kinds of cases that the Supreme Court should be making full decisions on more or less frequently? And we'll start with Justice Bacon.
So this has to do with our discretionary review, and not all cases that come to the Supreme Court are discretionary review. We take all capital cases directly from the trial court and review all of those cases because of the liberty interest that's at stake. But when it comes to our cert review, we are looking for very specific things in the cert petition. We're looking to see, is there a question of great public importance, a constitutional question? Was there, is there a divide in the way trial courts are approaching the issue? Is there a split in the Court of Appeals? Is it something that we need to provide direction on to clarify what law applies? Or is it something that has been unsettled or unresolved by the Supreme Court? So that's how we engage in that review of the many cert petitions that come before us. We do quite a bit, an overwhelming percentage of our cases are criminal cases, and New Mexico has a lot of criminal law. That development has occurred over time. The area that doesn't always make it to the Supreme Court because of the relative costs involved are civil cases, and we don't have as much civil law on our books, and I think that's where the court has a duty and a need to weigh in when those cases come before the court, because we don't have the depth and breadth of civil case law in New Mexico.
Thanks for your response. Let's move over to Ned Fuller.
Thank you. I agree with what Justice Bacon has said. I think one thing I might add is that cases or principles that are long established, that are well established, those are the kinds of cases we probably would not take, certainly not take as frequently. Where the law is well established, there's not a need for the Supreme Court to necessarily step in. In some ways, we're a directional court, or a court of guidance, if you will, to help the lower courts and give them the tools that they need to effectively administer justice. And so I think that's sort of the way that I would approach that.
All right. And for our candidate in Supreme Court Position 2, your question is, in addition to deciding cases, the Supreme Court has overall responsibility for the operation of the state courts. How do you see yourself contributing to those functions of the court that don't necessarily involve deciding cases? Justice Thompson.
Thank you, Chris. And having been a trial court judge, this is in the First Judicial District, this is of some significance to me. I think the first rule is first, do no harm. I think we need to allow the district courts to be able to do their work. They are the folks, the men and women on the ground. We need to make sure they have the resources to do it. And so I think that's the first principle. I think there's necessity with regard to some uniformity in rules and to ensure as much as we can, as we talk about equal justice and equal access to justice, that everybody around the state, whether you're litigating a case in Lee County or Bernalillo County, that you have the same or equal access to the law. And then, ensure an overall regulation of the other role we play is the regulation of judges, to ensure they're acting appropriate, the regulation of the bar, to ensure that they are acting appropriately as well. So I think that is a significant and important role of the Supreme Court. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. And that does it for our question and answer portion of the evening. What we'll do now is we will just very briefly, if you could take about 45 seconds to a minute or less, just some final thoughts, final closing remarks, anything that you would like to leave with voters or with your colleagues. We'll start with the Supreme Court candidates and then move to the appellate court candidates. And so we'll start with Justice Bacon, and then we'll move on to Ned Fuller.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to everyone who's hung in there with us tonight as we have answered these myriad questions. You have a choice. You have a choice to make on election day in the ballot box, and I think focusing on who possesses the right experience and the right skills is really what it boils down to. So I'd simply ask you for your support and your vote, whether if you haven't voted already. And I look forward to working with everyone, including all of my colleagues here on the screen tonight, going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the things that speaking to the voters, what I hope you will look at is the experience and the philosophy of the candidates. I've had a wide variety of experience, both as an advocate, as a judge, and as an executive. And I've been able to see the law from a variety of perspectives. I think that gives me unique insight. And having administered the court system in the workers' compensation setting, I have some ideas and have had to deal with some of the challenges that courts face. And then philosophy, it's important. You've heard it over and over again tonight that we have judges who will follow the law, put aside their own personal preferences and beliefs. We've got great candidates here, and I think the future looks bright for our courts.
Thank you. Final thoughts from the candidate, Justice David Thompson, in the position 2.
Thank you, and I just want to thank everybody and Chris for moderating, and thank you for your interest in the judiciary. As we described today, you play a role in defining our legislature, and the voters have decided you play a role in deciding who your judiciary is. And we hope you research your judiciary and rely on their experience, and perhaps rely on the views of the bipartisan commissions that nominated us, and where we were lucky and honored to be appointed. Please, finally, I do want to close with this. Please be well, and please be safe. And thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Justice Thompson. Judge Ives.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks again for moderating this this discussion, and thanks to everybody who's watching and who participated. I just want to start with a quick observation that for me, it's just been a real pleasure to be part of this conversation, and refreshing, because so much of our political discourse these days is uncivil and unsubstantive, and I think this is a nice example of a substantive conversation and a civil conversation among people who have mutual respect, and I'm grateful for that. I won't repeat what's been said. I agree with the statements about getting to know the candidates and the importance of doing that, and the power that you have as a voter to choose who your judges are going to be. Here in New Mexico, it's a direct power that you have to vote for judges directly, unlike the federal system, where you are one or more steps removed from that process. So you're entrusted with a big responsibility, and really appreciate you taking the time to learn about the judiciary tonight and listen to us. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other candidate for Court of Appeals position 1, Barbara Johnson.
Thank you to all involved tonight. I want you to know that I have a very good work ethic. I've worked very hard to become a lawyer. The law has also been very good to me. I find at this time in my life, I would like to serve more of New Mexico's citizens than I can by being a private practitioner. I'm honored to be one of the candidates. I'm honored to speak with all of these people tonight. And I want anyone that wishes to please call me, email me, ask me anything else you want to know. If you haven't heard enough of me already tonight, I'll be happy to talk more. And to please take your responsibility very seriously to investigate the candidates and go vote. I know all lawyers will, but I have many clients and others who call and ask me about the judicial candidates. And I point them to websites and to everybody that knows them and say, make your own decision, but do your homework first. And thank you again.
Thank you. Final thoughts from the Court of Appeals position 2 candidates, and we'll just go uninterrupted, starting with Judge Henderson, then Gertrude Lee, then Stephen Curtis.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, State Bar. Thank you, Appellate Section. We really do appreciate everyone's time this evening and listening to the different judicial candidates. I think the collegiality that you're seeing tonight has been a great representation of this race up to date. And so everybody is showing what it takes to be a judge. And so thank you so much for everybody this evening. Two personal asks. Obviously, knowing the experience of every judge is extremely important. And with my background, having done trials and appeals in both state and federal court, I think I certainly have the background and experience for that. And having been appointed as the first Black appellate judge in the state of New Mexico and also the first Black woman to hold a statewide office, I ask for your support to ensuring that I'm elected and keep those two historical positions here in New Mexico. I also ask that everybody looks at all of the judges, not just the statewide judges here tonight, but all of the judges up and down the ballot, our district court judges, our metro, magistrate, municipal judges. As lawyers, we know how important every judge is, and the role that judges play in society, I think, is being shown how much more important that is more than ever. So thank you for your time this evening.
Again, thank you for your time and attention. I've really enjoyed this conversation and hearing from everybody. It's, you know, I'm a nerd at heart and I love hearing it all. It's all about the law. You know, I've devoted my legal career to public service, and I truly enjoy legal research and writing, and it's a big part of why I'm running for this position. And you know, I think my strength is my ability to bring a different perspective to the courts as a Navajo trial attorney, born and raised in rural New Mexico with experience in both state and tribal court, and as a leader within the tribe at one point. And you know, there's also some history that could be made if y'all choose to vote me into office as the first Native American appellate judge in the state of New Mexico. And take a look at the information that is out there about us, which groups have endorsed different candidates. I've been endorsed by the Albuquerque Journal and the Albuquerque Police Officers Association. And I thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm very concerned about the governmental overreach in all areas of our country, not just the state, but in the country itself, local government. I think the executive and the legislature are taking actions that are in violation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I think we need to remember that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution was developed by some very smart people, and I think they were inspired when they did so. My focus would be to protect the individual rights of New Mexico citizens based on the Constitutions, the U.S. Constitution, the New Mexico Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. I think that's important, and I would bring, I think, a different perspective to the Court of Appeals.
Thank you. All right, final thoughts from the Court of Appeals Position 3 candidates. We'll start with Judge Yohalam.
Thank you. I also would like to thank you, Chris, for doing this, and thank the appellate practice section and the bar. And also thank the people who have supported my candidacy. I want to reassure everybody that I will, you know, that I see this position both as a great honor and as a tremendous responsibility, and that I take that very seriously, and am working and will continue to work if I'm elected very, very hard to struggle with the issues and to struggle with decisions and to do this the right way. Please go out and vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I respectfully request your vote for me for Court of Appeals, Tom Montoya, Court of Appeals, position number 3. What you get if you vote for me, you're going to get a very hard-working judge, very conscientious, very deliberate, thoughtful, and taking the oath of office very seriously, respecting the Constitution, respecting the rule of law, and respecting you. We've been talking about judges and justices all night. right now, you are the judge. You are above every single one of person who has talked right here. You get to decide, amazingly, who our justices are and who our judges are. If you have voted for me already, I thank you very much. If you have voted for my opponent, thank you very much. You are the judge. I don't win them all in court, but I respect the judge, and that's who you are. And thank you for voting. Thank you for your time and attention.
And thank you to all of the candidates who participated tonight. Best of luck to you for the rest of your race and as we go into election night. Thank you, State Bar of New Mexico, for inviting me to moderate. I had a really great time, especially for me as a voter in New Mexico. I feel much more informed after listening to everybody, so thank you so much. Shameless plug, of course, KOB in concert with NBC News has a very ambitious election night plan. We hope that you'll tune into KOB next Tuesday. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Good night, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.